Awesome. Well, I alluded to this earlier. We kind of briefly talked about the quote unquote every plant as a superfood, and I saw you post about that on Instagram too, which I thought was a really fun topic to ask you about. You also mentioned in that post something about the hibiscus cycle, which I thought was really unique. I'd never heard that before. So, can you tell us why every plant is a superfood and the hibiscus cycle?
Yeah, so kind of going back to like I said when I was first getting into herbal medicine, the idea and the marketing behind a lot of different things is get this because it's really great for you and it has fill in the blank, whatever comparison, this much times whatever. Like I'm sure you've seen like a moringa packet where they're like,
Hmm.
compare the oranges,
Right.
it's got this much vitamin C compared to spinach, it's got this much iron compared to whatever, right? And sort of making out certain things to be really over the top and really great and really exotic. And like the plants and the ingredients are, but it becomes sort of a thing when it sort of caters to a lot of like diet culture and this very
Totally.
transactional way that we look at plants, where it's about taking a plant and being like, this one's so good and this one's even better. And this, I don't know if the word's like reductionist, but like the idea that more is better. Like the
Yeah.
more moringa I take, the more great it's going to be. The more acai berries and maca and cacao and whatever else that we find in little packets is going to be even greater for me. And I think that I appreciate to an extent the way that that world and that marketing exposed me to different things.
Sure.
But at the same time, it became harmful when you start to realize it's the sourcing behind it. It's the marketing for that. I had had someone tell me before they were like the equivalent of doing maca powder is like the U.S. selling potato flour to Peru.
Yeah.
Because maca is like a
Right.
starchy root that you cook and eat. It is good for you, like
Right.
beets, for
Sure.
instance.
Yeah.
And but
Beets a
it's like,
superfood.
yeah, beets superfood, maca is superfood, whatever. They all have their own background to like why they are so great for you. But I
Sure.
think the superfood marketing, yeah, it was kind of coined specifically to get people to consume more of that, which
Yeah.
again, like I said, it perpetuates the idea of just like commodifying things, as well as distancing the relationship from it because powders ship from across the world. And it's just like the more I get of this, the better. And I
Right.
still see that a lot in, some of these smaller like boutique companies where it's like a blend of certain things or like this very random like herb from some part of the world that's now in a tincture bottle and it's like this is whatever and it's been wildcrafted from the summit of whatever at 10,000 feet and it's like cool and honestly when I was younger and I was getting into it I was like oh cool like I want that um
Absolutely.
but then over time it's like that's because the marketing and it's because this whole exotic the new thing people want um so and I talk a lot about that I mean in the class too but something that I've developed like you were saying the hibiscus cycle is just kind of like a name that I gave that phenomenon I guess
Yeah.
and it can be filled in with a lot of different things it's basically the cycle is like four different stages hibiscus was one of them that I referenced as like not the origin, but one of the things that has gone through that. Um, you have a plant that originates somewhere. It originates actually in northern Africa, where literally every part of the plant is used. The seed pods, the seeds themselves, the fiber of the stem, the roots, the calyxes, which we see more for the main medicine, the leaves, the flowers, right? And then ends up being introduced to a different part of the world, which varies with different plants of like how it got there. And over time, it settles in, especially this is more of a modern thing I think I'm referencing, is where something becomes really popular
Mm.
hibiscus tea or acai or like I said, cacao, maca, kava kava, tons and tons of things that get like tons of marketing and a bunch of companies trying to produce it and sell it.
Right.
Um, and then what happens is those plants become very expensive, very like niche marketing
Right.
sort of things, and they end up being inaccessible to literally the same people that come from that culture or were originally able to access it. Seeing something like quinoa, growing, which now, and these things fluctuate, and there's so many different levels
Sure.
of conversation to it because now you see stuff that's more affordable. Quinoa becomes a thing, and it's like quinoa has this much more protein than rice, and this much more whatever than this grain and that, and it's like the whole competition nutrition thing. Um, and then it becomes expensive because they say it's superfood. And then from there, that as a traditional grain for people maybe who have migrated from that part of the world or whatever, it's taken out of cultural context with how it's used, and it's a lot harder to access. Like hibiscus, for instance, if you've ever tried hibiscus, like a Jamaican sorrel drink or a Puerto
Mm.
Rican, like any sort of Caribbean and tropical way of how we make hibiscus, it's blood red. It's really dark. We use a lot, and it's usually got a good amount of sugar, maybe ginger, cinnamon, something like that. Um, and it's just so interesting to see hibiscus buying like a $10 thing of organic hibiscus tea bags. I might use the whole box for like one thing, because they put a little bit in where they say like the medicinal qualities. I'm sure you get some. Is it's tart, it's sour, it's cooling. Um, but that cultural context is taken out of place, and suddenly it's like that much for a handful of some pinched dried up hibiscus to make a tea. So yeah, so there's a lot of levels to it, and I feel like I rant about this a lot, but it's
Totally.
that's kind of the basis. Yeah.
I resonated with so much of that. And I'm thinking to my early hippie days when I really first started getting into herbalism, I was buying like way too many goji berries. And I was probably spending most of
Goji
my
berry.
paycheck on goji berries because it was a sexy superfruit at the time. And it also, what you said something there earlier reminded me of like my early days as well when I was like consuming lots of different like self-helping spiritual books. I was like, oh, this next book is going to be the thing that puts me over the edge. And you were kind of talking about like, oh, this next superfood's going to be the next thing. And I totally remember being like that as well. Like, oh, goji berries now, oh, maca now, oh, spirulina now. Like this is going to be the thing that gets my health to the next level. But really, all we need is just like basic nourishment, and that could come from the form of something as cheap as an oat straw infusion. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
this isn't super glamorous or sexy, but it's got lots of vitamins and minerals in it, and super cheap as well. But they don't want to tell you that. The business and marketing machine doesn't want to tell you that. So
Yeah. Yeah, you put a nice label on that, and then you might make it a little more expensive, and then
exactly.
so it's sometimes just that. It's the marketing.
Yeah.
And I see that happen with certain things. Yucca specifically, like I've seen at Whole Foods, like almost $20 for a pound of yucca flour.
Right.
When that's literally like that's very cheap and very common in a lot of parts of the world because it's a very common crop. It's very accessible. And then with the marketing, it's not just yucca flour anymore. It's paleo, it's
Right.
gluten free,
Right.
and then it's like, oh, there's like other levels of why this is suddenly so expensive.
I might be misremembering, but in that Petty Herbalist podcast with you, I want to say Asia Dorsey might have even said sometimes it's cut with other flours as well. Is
Yeah,
that
could have
yeah.
wheat flour in it,
Right.
especially if it's one of those sort of things. A lot of times you get products from like I will look more for a grocery store, like an African grocer, or because it as a flour is used especially
Mm.
more within a lot of parts of Africa and Asia. And the leaves also of yucca, sorry, random side note, but the
Yeah.
leaves are really great too. You really don't see that in somewhere like a Whole Foods, but a lot of like Asian grocery stores will do yucca leaves. They're really nutritious. They're really amazing for you. And it's just, yeah, it's like every part, I mean, most parts of the plant being used. And at the same time, you have this cultural awareness from it. And to see something that people who can't afford much in certain countries have, all we have is yucca flour. Um, other side of the world, it's so much, it's just like mind blowing to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. You sound like you're pretty fond of this yucca plant. Um, so Lake was saying, I'm drinking the nettle infusion. Asia Dorsey taught me how to make in her winter herbal immersion course. Highly recommended. So that's cool. Yeah, more
Nice.
frugal nutrition in the form of nettle nourishing herbal infusion.
One of
Definitely
the
consume
best.
that. So good. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
literally just like a like an overnight infusion of like nettle and like two other things like oat straw or
Can't go
whatever.
wrong.
And that's the perfect multivitamin. You don't need all the other stuff.
So true.